You can save every day by shopping at Whole Foods Market. Seriously, don't just go for the big sales. They have literally thousands of low-price goods with their house brand, 365 by Whole Foods Market. While at happy prices, limited-time seasonal flavors, and all the quality you expect, like no high-fructose corn syrup or over 300 other ingredients banned from all the food they sell. There's so many ways to save at Whole Foods Market. Now you know.
Saul was like, hey, love what you're doing down there. Keep up the good work.
Love your work. Huge fan.
But in the story, it gets turned into David played the harp and soothed the savage beast.
Right?
Yeah.
Another point in the gay column. I'm sorry.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dan McClellan.
And I'm Dan Beecher.
And you are listening to the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and we combat the spread of misinformation about the same. How are things, Dan?
Man, things are good. I'm out here combating misinformation like a dang superhero on your t-shirt or something.
It's the Amazing Spider-Man today. Those of you who are listening to us through the listening channels don't get to see that, but you're rather famous for it. It's you got two things you're famous for. Like, there's the sort of the Bible scholar thing, and that's like, whatever, okay, that's fine. And then there's this t-shirt thing that you do. It is a thing that I do. That it's nice though, because when I go speak at universities, like give lectures and like named lectures, they're like, this is the Dr. So-and-so lecture, and I show up in a thing t-shirt, and I'm like, is this okay? And they're always like, absolutely, that's what we wanted you to do.
And your institution can't fire you for it. Because this is it. This is the only institution you got.
Yeah, this is as institutional as I get. So
yeah,
we have a great show on deck, don't we?
Yeah. Speaking of heroes, last week we did a thing called Biblical Heroes? ? And
yeah, and it was is Enrique Iglesias really a hero?
Yeah. Turns out he very much is. But. So we've got some more ? Heroes here, but interestingly, our first chapter and verse, our first segment is going to involve lady heroes, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
And our second half of the show is going to be a History's Mysteries, where we discuss David. By popular demand, historicity has come up a few times from listeners. So
yeah, they want to know, is this real?
Yeah.
What is historical about the story of ye old King David? So
the biblical figure, the one of the most important figures in the Bible, constantly mentioned thereafter, and so we'll get to the bottom of it. And by the end of the show, you will know definitively the historicity of David.
More or less.
I'm making that promise on Dan's behalf. But first, let's dive into a chapter and verse.
All right, what are we looking at?
So this is from the book of Judges, and we're looking at Judges chapters 4 and 5.
Okay.
Which are both sort of the same thing, but in different form.
We've got a bit of a historical narrative going on with our judge. It's actually about Deborah and Barak.
Yes.
And then we've got the famous Song of Deborah in Judges chapter 5, which is some poetry that some scholars think may be among the oldest poetry in all the Bible. This might be really, really old.
Wow. Okay.
There is disagreement about that, but.
What isn't there disagreement about? I think our listeners have gotten to the point where they understand that, like, basically everything that we say, there's disagreement about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So dive in a little bit.
Let's set the table a little bit regarding Judges.
Okay.
Because the book of Judges is a collection of a bunch of stories about people who judged in Israel.
Right.
And
we talked about Samson last week.
Talked about Samson, yeah.
Who was one of these judges.
Yeah, and we get this, and it's kind of like just these serial stories where the narrator is like, and there was no king in the land. Everybody did was right in their own eyes, and God, just was annoyed. So God brought this people to harass them, and then God was like, maybe I'm not so annoyed, and so God raises up a judge, and this is basically a warlord. This is the person who is fighting back in the absence of a king and kind of a centralized authority. And this period in the history of ancient Israel is, the book of Judges comes from much later than the time periods they narrate. But there are probably some historical memories preserved in some of these stories from a period before the rise of an actual state, when it really was just a bunch of scattered tribes just trying to survive off the land, and they occasionally have to defend themselves against the Philistines. Those are the main ones that are the enemies here. We're going to see there are some Canaanites who are the villains, and basically they kind of band together under this chieftain, this warlord, who's going to defend them against the people who are encroaching on their territory. And then as soon as that threat is gone, everything goes back to the way it was.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird little kind of seasonal, where we're briefly a type of kingdom, and then we're not, and then we're briefly a type of kingdom. And so they're not kings, they're judges. But one of these is Deborah. And so at the beginning of chapter 4, the Israelites are again doing what was evil in the sight of Adonai after the judge Ehud had
Which
died.
is basically, that's just the setup for all of these, as you say. All of these stories kind of start with that. And there's a lot of like little stories and little things that are thrown in Judges. Like I read the chapter before this, hoping it would provide me with some context. It did not. But
you didn't like the Ehud story?
No, it was a fine story. It just didn't give me any context for the Deborah story.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that the chapter before this ends with a single verse that says, "After him came Shamgar, son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad. He too delivered Israel." But that's the whole story.
Yeah.
That was, he didn't get a whole like big old long thing like Samson did. I mean, you know.
Deborah gets 2 chapters. Samson gets, I think 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And there are major judges and then there are minor judges. Like
I'm going to say Shamgar killing 600 Philistines with an ox goad is a pretty, it's not 1,000 with a jawbone of an ass, but it's still pretty. That's no small shakes. I'm just going to say.
All I think of is the old Mickey Mouse cartoon where he kills 7 flies with one swat, and then he opens up his windows and says, "I killed 7 with one blow." And they all think he's talking about 7 giants, and they're like, "Well, there's a giant who's harassing us. Go take on the giant."
Right. We'll talk about taking on giants later on.
That's a different story.
But Deborah is so the lead into the Deborah story is nothing. There is no lead into it.
Right.
There's just a guy killing people with an ox goad, and then we jump directly into the Israelites doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord.
Right. And they sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hatzor, and Hatzor is now it's just ruins, but used to be a good-sized city just north of the Sea of Galilee. You can go visit there. And
cool.
The commander of Jabin's army was Sisera, who lived in Haroshet Hagoim, which probably means Haroshet of the Gentiles or of the nations,
right?
Rather than just another part of the name. And then the Israelites cried out to Adonai for help because these folks had a bunch of chariots and they had been oppressing the Israelites for some 20 years. And
chariots will help, man. Apparently that's some high-tech warring stuff. So
that's actually something that a lot of scholars think the invasion of the Sea Peoples, which happened around 1200 BCE, which is what caused these people known as the Philistines to occupy the coastal area That's what brought them there. They probably brought chariots with them and introduced that technology into the region. If not them, then it would have been the Egyptians from the south. But these regions, the chariots wouldn't have been incredibly helpful in, these mountains and everything like that that they're fighting. And so, and I think in Judges 19, that's one of the things that, was it Judges 19 or there's a story about how it seems to be saying that God was unable to deliver some folks because they had chariots.
They had chariots, and what's God going to do?
Like, it's a little rich for my blood.
Whoa! You didn't tell me they had chariots. What's going on? All right, we get Deborah is introduced. It says, at that time, Deborah, a prophet, wife of Lapidoth. At least that's what it says in the NRSV.
Mm-hmm.
I did read that is not the only possible translation of that moment. That Lapid or Lapidoth might mean, it might not have been a person, but a description of Deborah as being like a woman of fire or lightning or something like that.
Oh yeah, I don't know that I've looked that up, but
that's what Wikipedia said.
That's what Wikipedia says. Okay,
what it says in Wikipedia is lapid translates as torch or lightning, and therefore the phrase,
there we go, lapid. Okay, which could be the guy could be named after the notion of. But lapidot sounds like it would be plural. And so that could be an abstract plural, an abstraction. So a woman of lightningness.
Of light. Okay.
So, yeah.
So anyway, but I think most scholars, and since you didn't even know that existed, I think it's safe to say.
No, I didn't. I had not looked at that.
Most scholars probably think that it's just she's the wife of Lapidot.
Yeah, and she's judging under a palm between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. So this is the northern hill country. And this idea of judging under a palm, we see this a handful of times. Like even Saul was by his favorite tree when he's ruling. So
that's interesting. That is. Do we have a sense of why that is? Because a lot of the imagery of like the Buddha is under a tree and stuff.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why ancient peoples of Asia are into their wise people being under trees?
There's got to be some symbolism associated with life or with authority or something like that. There were trees that could be associated with certain deities, and like the date palm could be associated with a goddess. So there could be some of that kind of stuff lurking in the background. But I don't know of any special significance associated with this particular one. And is this a date palm? I think this is, I think so. Palm.
Here's a question that I have also, or rather, one thing we shouldn't do is gloss over the fact that there's a woman who's declared a prophet and is the judge, is the warlord of this moment. That sounds unusual to me. Am I wrong? It seems like that's not something that like that was very unexpected to me.
Well, they certainly don't lead you into. They're not like get a load of this.
No, it's given no extra oomph in any way.
Yeah. We have, and this happens elsewhere. Like when King Josiah finds the book of the law in the temple, they take it to Huldah, the prophetess, and she's the one who tells the king what to do. And so every now and then you just have women showing up in positions of power and authority, and the text doesn't seem to treat it as anything unusual. Of course, anyone who's reading the text closely recognizes it is quite unusual for for these texts. But whether this is a literary creation or just a feature of this time period, I don't know. I think both kind of have ways that they make sense to me. But
I mean, no matter what it is, I find it remarkable that it's treated as unremarkable.
Yeah.
The fact that this woman was given all of this power and authority, and that there's no ink spilled to question her authority or her power or her ability as a prophet or anything like that. It is just it's as assumed to be true as any of the men.
Yeah. And we don't really get much questioning until we get to the pseudo Paul and 1 Timothy and our interpolation in 1 Corinthians 14. That's when the claws come out. But so they're going to go hang out around Mount Tabor, and they're going to try to draw Sisera and the enemy out to meet them there. And we've got this weird thing with where Deborah summons Barak, and he shows up, and she tells him what the plan's going to be. And
Barak is just a leader of he's just an army general of some sort or something.
Yeah, and he says in verse 8, "If you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go."
Yeah,
kind of a weird thing. And she's like, "Oh, I'm going to go with you, definitely." But
he's like, "I'm not going if you don't come. This is over. There's no way, man. No way."
And she says, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." So we do have kind of a bit of a tip of the hat to the fact that it is unusual that a woman is stepping into this role. But this is not about Deborah.
Right.
This is about somebody else.
Yeah, I assumed it was about Deborah when she said that. I assumed that she was like sort of obliquely referring to herself, but she wasn't. I also think that that's a weird thing to say to a guy who was just right then showing reticence about going at all. To be like, and also, you're not going to get any glory. Some other lady's going to get all the glory. So have fun.
Barak is just like, okay.
All right, we'll just go then. And he gathers up his 10,000 men or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And armies from other neighboring tribes, I guess.
Yeah, this is something that was pretty common at the time when you had to go to war. You wanted to get all your friends involved, so that you had as much power behind you as possible. And the Sisera shows up. They get the 900 chariots there, and 10,000 warriors are following Barak. And then it just says the Lord threw Sisera and all his chariots and all his army into a panic for Barak. So Sisera falls off of his chariot, and I'm thinking of El Guapo at the end falling off his horse. "You stupid horse!" And Barak pursues the chariots and the army, and they're going chasing after him. And then Sisera, he has fled away on foot, and he makes it to the tent of Yael. Adonai is El, or is God, wife of Heber the Kenite. There was peace between this Canaanite and Heber the Kenite.
And before we go on, I just want to make it clear: Sisera fleeing, he's the only guy that made it alive. His entire army was destroyed by Barak, and he's running away on his own. I also want to point out that every time I had to read the word Kenite, all I could think of was Ryan Gosling in the Barbie movie, because Kenites got to have that Kenergy. That's all there is to it. So Sisera is defeated already, but he himself has not got. So he has fled to his boss's wife's tent, which I thought was a little bit like, woo, like I was
at least a comrade's wife's tent. And Jael comes out to meet him, says, "Turn aside, my lord. Turn aside to me.
What does that mean?
No fear. Turn aside. Oh, it's just come on in. You're on a journey in a certain direction. Turn off the road. Take the exit. Stop in to the tent." And it says she covered him with a rug. Hope it wasn't a very heavy rug. And then he asked for a little water. He's a little parched. So she gets him some milk and gives him a drink and tucks him back into his rug.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Just keep a lookout. I'm going to get a little shut-eye here.
If anybody comes, tell him I ain't here."
Yeah. And so she grabs a tent peg and a hammer and just goes and basically nails his head to the ground.
Yeah.
It's
explicit. It's funny because it skips over a lot of details. But does not skip over any details with this tent peg and hammer. Like literally went softly. Jael, wife of Heber, took the tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. We had to know that it was in her hand, and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground.
Yep.
That is...
You got to aim past the target. That's the trick.
That's the key.
Yeah. In martial arts, to break the board, you got to aim past the board. That's the trick. So she was...
Homegirl knew how to drive a stake, man.
Yeah. She had the fundamentals down. Yeah. And so he was...
Because you really kind of get only one shot at that one. Yeah. If it's a glancing blow, you're in trouble.
Yeah. He was lying fast asleep from weariness, and he died.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So so Jael gets the glory on that one, and
which is funny because she wasn't even part of the whole real battle, but she killed the final boss, I guess.
Yeah, and Barak shows up at the tent, and you can see him like run into the tent. He's like, "I got you now. I'm gonna get the glory." And then she opens the door, and he's like, "Oh, I bet you killed him already, huh?" Fine.
I mean, Barak was told. He knew this was coming.
You can save every day by shopping at Whole Foods Market. Seriously, don't just go for the big sales. They have literally thousands of low-price goods with their house brand, 365 by Whole Foods Market. While at happy prices, limited-time seasonal flavors, and all the quality you expect, like no high-fructose corn syrup or over 300 other ingredients banned from all the food they sell. There's so many ways to save at Whole Foods Market. Now you know.
At Evernorth Health Services, we believe costs shouldn't get in the way of life-changing care, and we're doing everything in our power to make it possible. Behavioral health solutions that also keep your projections at their best? It's possible. Pharmacy benefits that benefit your bottom line? It's possible. Complex specialty care that cares about your ROI. It's possible. Because we're already doing it. All while saving businesses billions. That's Wonder made possible. Learn more at evernorth.com/wonder.
And then we've got the Song of Deborah immediately after that, which tells the same story over again.
But we go to Judges 5 and it's suddenly a poem, and it's like, whoa. Yeah.
But there's some interesting features of this poem that a lot of people may not notice. You've got, and one of the things that the poem includes is Shamgar. I don't know if you noticed that. You mentioned that Shamgar, who the one who killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, right at the end of chapter 3. Yeah. If you go into the song, verse 6, it says, "In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased, and travelers kept to the byways." So they're kind of describing kind of a Wild West scenario where it wasn't safe to be out on the roads because there were brigands about. And
if you're not careful, you're going to get killed with an ox goad. Like it's dangerous out there.
Yeah. And we have this story about just basically how things are, they're causing trouble in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Until we have in verse 12, "Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song, arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam." And one gets the sense that this poem is a lot older than the narrative, and so the narrative may have been constructed kind of in light of the poem, because Barak doesn't really have much of a role in the story. We have a bunch of people who are mentioned. They basically say, all right, everybody who's for the Lord, for Adonai, come to battle against Sisera the Canaanite. And it rattles off a bunch of names. From Ephraim, they set out into the valley following you. Benjamin with your kin. From Machir marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun, those who bear the martial staff. And we get a bunch of tribes, and most of them are the 12 tribes of Israel. But not all of them are here.
Okay.
Because it lists those who came, and then it condemns those who didn't.
Sure.
But it doesn't mention Judah at all. And some of the tribes have different names, like Machir is a different one, and Meroz. They did not come to the help of the Lord against the mighty. So one theory is that this may be poetry that's preserved from an earlier period before they kind of settled on what the 12 tribes were going to be and what their names were going to be. That this is preserved from an earlier time, and it doesn't have the southern tribes,
right?
Or it doesn't have Judah, and so maybe this is when Israel just referred to the kingdom of Israel in the northern hill country. So there's a lot of debate about what all this means, but it is. I think it's fascinating to think of this poem, at least the list of tribes, as a preservation of the earliest tribes of Israel before they went mainstream. And, we get the 12 tribes that we know today.
It does occur to me: is this? I don't know what historians and academics say about this, but it seems very possible to me that oral histories were passed down in song and poetry.
Oh yeah,
for a long time, and that maybe that's the origin of many of these stories. We just don't have the songs that were the origin of these things.
Yeah,
you suggested that this song predates the story, and then the story was just a reworking of the information contained in the song to make sense of it.
I think that makes sense to me, just because the narrative contains much more detail. Right. And I think we've discussed it before, but you don't have historical narrative prose in alphabetic languages like Hebrew until the late 9th century BCE. And so prior to that, all the texts are either like short little missives or they are poetry. And so, yeah, absolutely. The stories from prior to the rise of narrative prose would have been structured around poetry, because that's one of the ways to give structure to something in a way that makes it easier to remember.
Yeah, makes it sticky, makes it catchy.
Right. So whether it's meter or whether it's rhyme or whatever it is, that's one of the ways to help remember it. Whereas narrative prose, it's the fact that it's being committed to text that facilitates, its later access. It's not something that you've got to memorize. So poetry frequently is earlier than the narrative.
And you mentioned time periods. One thing we didn't touch on is, when is this story of Deborah meant to have taken place, and what time period do we think the text is from?
So the book of Judges is not incredibly clear on time periods. It kind of is jumping regionally and chronologically around, but in general, it would have been between like 1200 BCE and Saul toward the end of the 11th century BCE. So, you've got around a 200-year span.
Okay.
But the reality is that most of these stories probably come from the 9th or the 8th century BCE. But this poem, the Song of Deborah, could come from before that, possibly as early as around 1000 BCE.
So when this text was written, or especially the not so much the poem, but chapter 4 rather than chapter 5, that was likely written in you say the 800s BCE, or
the 9th or the 8th century, more than likely the 8th century. So that would be the 700s.
Okay,
BCE.
700s, but about the 11th or 12th century. Is that what you said? I've lost the plot. 13th.
It's probably looking back toward historical memories from much earlier, but probably not. Probably not any further than around 1000 BCE. But.
Okay. And are there any other texts? We'll be talking more about this, but are there any other non-biblical texts that affirm any of this story, or is this story basically it's just here, and we have there's no way to verify any kind of historicity with this?
There's not. There are some ways that people will track down like place names, like in one of the stories of David, it's like he got the booty and he split up the booty, and the booty went to the people from this town and this town and this town and this town and this town. And like, if you go dig into a lot of archaeological stuff, you will find that those towns weren't inhabited in the time when David was supposed to be alive, but they were all inhabited in the 750s BCE or something like that. So you might be able to say, so it sounds like this story at least was written in no earlier than this time period.
Right.
But apart from that kind of stuff, there's not really much that we can do. But there are some other fascinating things I wanted to point out in here. One of the things that I really enjoy is the fact that in verse 20, it says the stars fought from heaven. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. And so the stars are the heavenly bodies, the host of the heavens. And the host of the heavens just means the armies of the heavens. And here they're actually functioning precisely as Adonai's armies, because they're in their courses, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but because they're divine beings and they're God's army, they are also capable of being deployed in battle. And so
that would explain the confusion that Sisera's army experienced. If they're getting like laser beamed from the stars, that would explain why they went into a panic.
Yeah. And then we have the curse of Meroz. Says the angel of the Lord, which is probably a later part of the text. Curse bitterly its inhabitants because they did not come to the help of the Lord. And this is there's a theory about the rise of the nation of Israel that initially, we have a reference to Israel in the Merneptah Stele from around 1208, 1210 BCE. And it refers to Israel using a determinative for a people. So it's not a city-state, it's not a kingdom, it's not a nation, it's just a people. And there's a theory that, there are a variety of theories associated with this, but the one that I think makes the most sense to me is that these were really just a bunch of scattered tribes, and if somebody came to cause trouble from outside, they banded together, and they're like, all right, we're going to become this little confederation, or amphictyony, if you want to borrow a term from further west in the Mediterranean. And if you were part of that organization, if they, raised the banner, you had to go fight. And there was somebody would take up position as the head chief, the head warlord or whatever. And it sounds like some of these folks didn't come to the battle. That they named the tribes that did, and they named the tribes that didn't, and the tribes that didn't got shamed for it. But
got
one
put
theory,
on blast.
Yeah, got put on blast. One theory is that this was a seasonal thing. It was a situationally emergent thing, and then at some point they just decided we need to stay together, and so and so is going to take up the throne as king, and then you've got the nation of Israel.
Right.
And then, centuries later, we get the story about how, Abraham gave birth to Isaac, who gave birth to Jacob, and Jacob gave birth to all of the tribes that are now confederated. And so we're all part of the same family. Right. And so that is probably all a later fictional literary creation from these tribes that originally probably were not genetically related, but just happened to occupy the same northern hill country.
Right. Okay,
so,
there you go. After one of the parts that stuck out to me in the song, we're about to move on, but they're talking about the spoils of the war.
And we got Jael. Jael takes care of Sisera in the poem as well.
Yes, so that's right. So all of the main plot points line up.
Yep.
And then it just in case you weren't. You were worried that this wasn't a sexist part of the book because there were these women heroes. It does say that in the spoils of the war. And are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A woman or two for every man. And then, so one of the spoils of war is women for everybody. And then the rest are dyed and embroidered clothes. So those are the things of value, I guess. So there you go. That's the story of Deborah. Very interesting stuff.
Oh, hang on a second. I'm looking at the context of this. Out of the window she peered, the mother of Sisera gazed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest ladies make answer. Indeed, she answers the question, herself, are they not finding and dividing the spoil? A woman or two for every man, spoil of dyed stuffs for Sisera, spoil of dyed stuffs embroidered, 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for my neck as spoil. This is Sisera's mom.
Oh, I had missed
saying,
that.
Why is Sisera taking so long? Dinner's getting cold.
Oh.
And then goes, he's on the war path. He's raping and pillaging. He's
gathering his women.
Yeah.
A woman or two. Okay, there you go.
And then
so that's actually a disappointment. We don't know if women were divvied or not.
That's just Sisera's mom just daydreaming about him coming back with a bunch of extra virgins.
Yeah. Too bad he's a tent peg now.
Yeah, he did. And then she says, "So perish all your enemies, O Adonai, but may your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might." That's such a. I don't think I have taken note of who is doing the talking there before, but that's such a poetic way to end this. It's like we got the battle, we got Jael nailing his head into the ground, and then it's like pans to
cut to
like I'm thinking of like a little Etruscan estate on the hillside, and she's looking out the window, and the curtains are flapping in the breeze, and she's going,
And she's dreaming about all of the embroidered stuffs that she's going to get.
Yeah,
from when her son comes back a victor.
A rather ominous drawing to a close of
weird
narrative.
Okay,
I don't know why I never noticed that before.
That's really interesting. Okay,
yeah. Okay,
cool. Well, you live and you learn, and we both didn't catch that until just now. I love it. Let's move on to History's Mysteries.
And who is the mystery guest for today? Well, I guess we already talked about it. It's no mystery.
We already mentioned
it's David. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that many people have written in to us to ask us to talk about David, the historicity of David, and also his son Solomon. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit as well.
A little bit, yeah.
But yeah, let's start with, well, I mean, you can start wherever you want. I will say that I grew up, and the only thing I knew about David was that he killed a giant, which you ruined for us in a previous episode. Because
you're welcome.
Because that wasn't David, or was it? And then when I actually read some of the book, I learned that he had a very special relationship with a guy named Jonathan. We won't get into that too much, but it does seem very intense.
Yeah.
But Jonathan, but there's this whole thing about Saul, who is the king, and all this. Anyway, it's a big, long story, and a lot of time is spent on the rise of David, on David being pursued by Saul. And then eventually David becomes king. And it becomes like kind of the most important king in the history of Israel. Would that be fair to say?
I think so, because a lot of the prophetic material, a lot of the stuff coming in the exile and after, is all about that longing for the glory days of the Davidic kingdom. And David's dynasty lasts longer than any other dynasty associated with the nations of Israel or Judah. So and his line is the longest reigning one.
How did America go from a struggling series of settlements at the edge of a wilderness into the most powerful, prosperous, influential nation anywhere on earth? A lot of people say, well, it's just a pattern of happy accidents. But a pattern of happy accidents is still a pattern. The American Miracle tells that story. This is Michael Medved. I've been a historian for many years, 14 books, a radio host, fascinated during all that time with the bizarre series of coincidences that allowed the United States to acquire Alaska, or the Louisiana Purchase. Individuals in our past who seem to have been providentially placed where they could make a major difference. Subscribe to The American Miracle on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sick of those trivia podcasts that you don't even understand how to operate and they just have too many levers and buttons?
There's got to be a better way.
Now there is, with Good Job Brain, an offbeat quiz show and trivia podcast that makes learning new things easy and fun.
I just learned that artificial vanilla flavoring sometimes comes from the anal glands of a beaver, and now I can never shake that mental image. Thanks, Good Job Brain.
Good Job Brain is available for the low price of just 4 easy payments of free. It's a podcast.
Good Job Brain is part of Airwave Media and available on all podcast apps. Operators are standing by.
You know, we talked about these scattered tribes and all this stuff. He's kind of credited with consolidating everybody and he's credited with, he took Jerusalem and then sort of made that home base.
Mm-hmm.
And to talk more about sort of the contributions that he made theoretically, because we're going to get into whether there was a he or not. And
well, similar to the stuff with the judges, we have Saul, we have David, we have Solomon, and then we get the Jeroboam and the Rehoboam. God identifies somebody who says, "You're my guy," and then he just can't lose for a little bit, and then it turns out he was a loser the whole time, and so God's like, "You're no longer my guy. This is my guy." So, it happens with Saul, it happens with David. It happens with Solomon. It happens with all of the kings. So this cyclical thing that we got going on with the judges continues to go on, and there's a sense in which the story kind of bleeds from the judges, at least that the structure of these polities kind of bleeds into what's going on with Saul and David, because basically Saul is just the warlord who happens to be in charge when Israel decides, hey, we're just going to stick together as this larger unit rather than break back up into our tribes. So that's probably what happens when Saul, if Saul is historical, takes the throne. And David, when we look at the narratives that talk about David's rise to the throne, we've got a handful of different things. There are things that are related to Saul. There are things that have nothing to do with Saul. And there are things that are very clearly literary inventions intended to pump David up and just make it seem like he was the chosen one all along.
Right. Because it is confusing because David is not Saul's son, which would be the traditional way that, mode of succession to kingship.
Yeah. And that's a great point. David was not Saul's son, so why is David king? And so a lot of these stories are kind of intended to spackle over the holes in the story and
it feels that way. Happened. You can feel that as you're reading the narrative. Like it feels like, you're just plugging holes here. You're not telling.
And David and Jonathan.
Yeah.
It's the exact same. Jonathan is Saul's son. Jonathan would be the heir to the throne, but from the instant the two of them are in the same room together, they can't keep their hands off each other. And
Right.
Jonathan, this little covenant ritual that they do that some people compare to a marriage, Jonathan gives him all of the symbols of his royalty. Basically, Jonathan is saying, you are the rightful heir, not me. And so that's very clearly this literary invention covering the holes, trying to make it seem like David got there through, no fault of his own. He wasn't a warlord who just took over.
Right.
He, Jonathan's own son said, this is the man.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Jonathan and David's relationship, you got a lot of strong feelings on all sides of this. But there are two, I think, decent books that cover the historical David, one by Joel Baden called The Historical David, and the other by Jacob Wright, who we have had on the show, called David, King of Israel, and Caleb in Biblical Memory. And they both talk about this to some degree. But anciently they didn't have a concept of a homosexual person or a heterosexual person. Right. Sex was a lot more fluid than that. Just like for someone who may be spending the rest of their life in prison, they might be find themselves in a little more fluid orientation than otherwise. And so it wouldn't be entirely unheard of if this was a romantic relationship between David and Jonathan. we don't really think in earliest Israel they really had a lot of concern for this kind of thing.
Okay.
The only concern we get is like post-exilic holiness code priestly authors who are like, everything's supposed to be clean and everybody's got to be clean. We got to purge the land. Like that's happening centuries down the road in this little minority group. And so I don't think we have the data to say one way or another that this was or was not a romantic relationship. It's certainly plausible.
I mean, the data is you read the book and you go, oh, well, that seems really, really clear.
Well, yeah, it says that he loves him more than his love for him exceeded the love of women.
Yeah,
which could just be hyperbole, but it also could mean the love was functioning as that way.
They're constantly praising each other and hiding behind rocks and giggling. I don't know. It feels very clear to me. But then on the other side of the question, there's also the idea that yes, in order for this story to work, we need Jonathan's buy-in to David in order for him to give up his birthright of the kingdom.
Right.
And so having him that sort of worshipful of this kid who is not even, I mean, is he even he's like, I don't know if there's no real concept of nobility here, but he's the son of a like sheep farmer or something like that.
Yeah.
So
this is Jesse's is the youngest of 8 sons of Jesse. And when you go back in time, if you were the 8th son, nothing was coming to you.
Yeah, nobody gives a crap about you.
Yeah, you either went to join the army or the clergy.
Right.
You had one of those two things. And so David probably is a warlord who was operating in the South when, whether it was Philistines or whoever putting pressure on them, David was probably in charge of some groups. And it's actually very close to the story of Jephthah. I don't know if you recall, Jephthah was, this is Judges 11. So it starts off that Jephthah was the son of a man and a sex worker.
Okay.
And so Jephthah grew up in this guy's household, but all of this guy's legitimate sons were like, hey, we don't like you. And you're not going to inherit anything. And they end up driving him off. And so he runs off and he becomes a merc. He becomes the leader of a roving band of social outcasts and misfits. And it says the exact same thing about David, that he went out and he attracted all of the misfits and the outcasts, and they became, a roving band of mercenaries or warriors. And so he seems to have kind of made a name for himself as a warlord and was probably in charge of the groups that were taking care of fending off the encroachment of the Philistines in the southern territory. And that's probably how he got in good with Saul. Saul was like, hey, love what you're doing down there. Keep up the good work.
Love your work. Huge fan.
But in the story, it gets turned into David played the harp and soothed the savage beast.
Right.
Yeah.
Another point in the gay column. I'm sorry.
But then, and it's weird, Saul's like, who is this young man? I love the cut of his jib.
Yeah.
And then, he finds out who he is. And then the next chapter, Saul's like, what are we going to do about this battle with this Philistine? And David is out there and he's like, who is this young man? I like the cut of his jib. Yeah. And you're like, it's David again. It's still David.
You already liked his jib. His jib is already currently liked. What are you doing?
You know this man, and then we get the story with Goliath, which has been appropriated from Elchanan, and so many of the stories are very clearly just ways for later authors to say no. David was legit. He had right to be king. It wasn't like he just killed all the right people, as most kings find their way to the throne.
Right.
But yeah, I think the historical David was probably a warlord, somebody who left the family and went off and joined a group of mercenaries and warriors, and they made a name for themselves. Joel Baden makes an interesting point in his story about the historical David, that the text keeps saying that David just won battle after battle after battle against the Philistines, but never discusses any territory changing hands, which suggests that these are not significant battles. This is not really changing the tide of anything, which means it's probably just these skirmishes going on at the border, in the no man's land and along the borders, which supports the notion that he was just, a warlord just out trying to
just a bunch of highwaymen and wayfarers.
Yeah, and not the not the Chris Christopherson highwayman, not the good kind of highwayman, but and there's a theory that most scholars don't think there was ever a united kingdom. That there was a northern kingdom of Israel, and then there was a southern kingdom of Judah. The earliest reference that we have to both of these political entities is the Tel Dan stele, which we said there's not a lot going in there, but it's this Aramean named Hazael who says, yeah, I killed this guy, he was the king of Israel, and this guy, he was the king. And then he refers to another guy from the house of David. He doesn't say the kingdom of Judah. He just says from the house of David, which means this is probably a dynastic successor, and there's not yet an actual kingdom in Judah. And so there's a theory that I kind of like, that David was trying to take over the kingdom of Israel from Saul, and it didn't really work out well enough, and he made his way south, took over Jerusalem, and then was like, fine, I'm going to start up my own kingdom, and starts up a little chieftain or chiefdom or something like that in the south, in Judah, with Jerusalem as the capital. And then that becomes, Israel's little brother until around 722 BCE, when we got Tiglath-Pileser III coming in and destroying the northern kingdom. And then Judah is all that's left. And so Judah kind of appropriates the identity of Israel, the traditions, the literature, the history, and Judah is the one telling the story from then on out. And so, but because Judah is part of the Davidic dynasty, not Israel's dynasty, David becomes the main man.
And then they just they inject the David story into all of these other stories that they're appropriating.
Yeah.
Or set it in among those other stories or something.
Yeah. So and they're probably these stories were probably in circulation for a while. There were the early traditions about David, where he's going and he's even he's like, they represent him as kind of undercover, fighting for the Philistines for a while.
Yeah, for a minute there, he's like going from Philistine guy to Philistine guy, being like, "Hey, let us hold up here with you," and I'll and like he keeps siding with all of the wrong people. It's weird.
And you have this. There's a story of Nabal and Abigail that is an interesting story, where he shows up at at Nabal's house. And first off, the name Nabal means fool.
Okay.
So, like, right off the bat, this is very clearly fictional.
Right.
And says, hey, we've been protecting your crops from all the roving madmen. A real kind of, you got a lovely store here. I would hate to see something happen.
Right. Yeah. He's running a protection racket.
Yeah. And Nabal's like, get off my property, and just runs him off. And later on, David comes back and they kill Nabal and everybody else, and then David marries Abigail. And this is another way that, like, you can imagine how this went. He's running a protection racket. Nabal doesn't buy into it, so he's like, all right, well, option B, we'll just kill you. And but the way the story is told in the Bible, they represent Nabal as like this oaf, this idiot who is like, doesn't listen to the Lord and is doing everything wrong. And Abigail is out there kind of behind the scenes helping David out so that David will be merciful. And then I think it even has God killing Nabal instead of David.
Oh, wow.
But it's very clearly a sanitizing.
Right.
I think the cyclobenzaprine is still affecting my ability to form words. But
it's kicking in, huh? Nice.
But it's a sanitized version of a tale as old as time,
right?
For the Wild West, where that kind of thing goes on. So,
was Abigail? Abigail wasn't that David's first wife? David took a lot of wives.
He took a handful, and something that is pointed out that is it to David or Solomon? Does Nathan say? Yeah, I think Nathan tells David that the Lord gave you all of your your master's wives into your bosom. I think that was Nathan telling David that. But I don't remember.
And it was kind of a way. It was kind of a way of consolidating a bunch of it seems like he would go in and sort of like when he would take over a tribe, he'd just marry somebody from that tribe, a prominent woman from that tribe, and then they're his now.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then
I don't remember if Abigail was his first wife or not. But.
Okay. At one point in the book of Chronicles, I guess it lists his sons with various wives. So there's a whole bunch of things. The most famous son being Solomon by Bathsheba. Bathsheba is his wife from a pretty sketchy moment in his history. I mean, it's funny if anyone jumps to the defense of David, if they have the impulse to say, why is Dan saying David was such a bad dude? Read the book. Because the stuff he doesn't do good things. The whole Bathsheba thing is such a shocking story to me. Mm-hmm. He sees her. He sees her on the roof of naked on the roof of her building, and
it doesn't even say roof.
Right. He could be looking through. I was imagining it on the roof. He could be. He's looking.
You were thinking Leonard Cohen. You saw her bathing on the roof.
Right. No, maybe that's it. Yeah, but he sees her bathing.
Uh-huh.
He's a peeping Tom. Brings her in. Does not give her many options.
No options.
Takes her.
Yeah.
Has her, and then her husband comes back, and these Hittites and their anger management issues. But actually, her husband's awesome to him, but he doesn't want her husband to know what happened, and sends him back to the war front, and with instructions for him to be killed.
Yeah, at least put him in a situation where he was definitely going to die, even though he showed himself to be much more of a man of God than David. He was like, "Hey, go home." The text says, "Wash your feet," which is a euphemism,
right? What he's saying, the game here, right, is David is worried that he got Bathsheba pregnant, and he doesn't want her husband coming home to find a pregnant wife. So he's trying to trick him into going and having sex with her so that it's plausibly his kid.
Yeah, cover it up.
And then he doesn't. He won't. He's like, "No, I'm loyal to you."
Well, and he doesn't want to. The idea seems to be that he's a warrior, and if he's going to stay in God's favor and have God looking out for him on the battlefield, and if he's going to be a pure warrior, then no sex before a fight kind of rule. You gotta. So he sleeps outside of the bedchamber, so he maintains his ritual purity, so that he can do well in battle. Unfortunately, it does not work.
Yeah, well.
But,
I don't know how well he did in battle, but when the rest of the army takes a step back and just lets the other army have at him, it doesn't matter how well you do, you're still going to lose.
Yeah. And as we spoke about before in our episode on women covering up, this was totally David's fault.
Yeah.
That Bathsheba wasn't doing anything wrong. Bathsheba had absolutely no agency. And Bathsheba was just doing what she was required to do as a woman of this time period.
Yeah, there's no mention of her being a seductress or anything like that. That argument just falls flat on its face, if anyone were to make it. It's a fascinating story. He's an interesting anti-hero. Mm-hmm. But it sounds to me like you're convinced that there was a David, at least.
I think it's more likely than not that there was some kind of historical David. I think some of these stories about this warlord who just kind of was roaming around with a band of men who could have been Mary. That
we can neither confirm nor deny the merriness.
But their seams were probably perfect every time, mm-hmm. As the show says. I think that's more likely than not. I don't know that we can know anything really about this individual, but I think the start of this dynasty that is named in the Tel Dan Stele, I think that's got to be embedded in the foundations of those social memories, and so some features of David are probably historical.
Okay. Well, there you have it, friends. Maybe we'll come back to David at some point because there's a lot of David stuff. But for now, we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
If you guys would like to... Now, Dan, you and I are about to go and record our after party. That's more bonus content that we do every week. If you would like to get that bonus content or just get a early ad-free version of every episode of this show, you can head on over to patreon.com/Data Over Dogma. If you'd like to write into us, you can reach us at contact@dataoverdogmapod.com. And if none of those things appeal to you, we'll just see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
Data Over Dogma is a member of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. It is a production of Data Over Dogma Media, LLC, copyright 2024, all rights reserved.